You know, I feel like before COVID in 2020, most churches just uploaded their sermons almost as a luxury. Maybe if somebody was out of town and they wanted a way where the people could actually still watch the message that they missed. But nowadays, it's pretty rare to find a church without a YouTube channel. But what's not rare is churches with bad thumbnails. And this is actually a big problem. Let's talk about why. How's it going, everybody? My name's David. I'm the head video editor here at ReachRight, and we like to make content like this that helps out churches, ministry leaders, and even nonprofits. So if that's the kind of thing that interests you, it would mean a lot to us if you could hit that like button and then subscribe so that you're notified every single time we release a video. Now, we've been making content for churches specifically long enough to hear all of the different arguments about how churches shouldn't be a production, or we shouldn't care about social media or views and likes and all of that stuff. And our stance has always been, yes, that's not the priority. But the truth is, nowadays, the pathway for a lot of people to actually encounter God is going to come through the things that they commonly do. So if you have somebody that is not in a relationship with Christ yet, or maybe they are just looking for a church, they're gonna use things like the internet, social media, all of the things that we commonly use every single day. And social media platforms and YouTube alike use algorithms to push content to people specifically, usually based on things like their location or their likes and interests. So really all I'm trying to say is there's people in your community that are looking for a church, and a lot of times the only way they're gonna find you is through things like social media and YouTube. And if they get on YouTube and find your church, for example, with bad thumbnails, I'm not necessarily saying it's going to deter them away from your church, but it might not be the first thing that they check out, and it could be a missed opportunity. So what are the biggest common mistakes I see with church thumbnails? Number one, thankfully I'm seeing this less and less, but it's still pretty common with smaller churches or non-tech savvy churches, is just the churches that use the auto-generated thumbnail from the service. If you don't give YouTube a specific thumbnail to use for a video, they're going to just take a still image from some random moment in the sermon. And this is usually a big wide shot, zoomed out really far away. It could be a random moment with a random scripture on the screen or a random lyric from worship. It could be anything, you just don't know. And when somebody sees that, it's not exactly a desiring thing to click on, because honestly, nowadays, there's tons of content out there, not even church related, talking about just how important it is for YouTube thumbnails to influence people to choose if they want to watch a video or not. The second most common mistake I see with church thumbnails is the series graphic. A lot of churches will go through the effort of making a nice looking graphic related to the series, but the problem is you're gonna have multiple sermons that are within that series usually. So before you know it, your YouTube channel has, I don't know, anywhere from like 3 to 30, or some churches even more, in a series of all the exact same thumbnail from the series graphic. And it's just kind of a wall of the same thumbnail to look at. It's not desirable, and it doesn't keep things categorized. And again, when we're talking about algorithms or things getting pushed to people, they're just not gonna wanna click on it, especially if they think they've seen it before, because it's the same thumbnail. And finally, the third most common mistake I see in church thumbnails is something that a lot of YouTube channels in general make a mistake of, is just putting the exact same text in the thumbnail as they would the title of the video. This is especially common in churches because typically you have a title for a sermon that the pastor gives you, and churches don't know what to put in the title of the actual video, so they'll use that as a sermon. But then when it comes to the thumbnail, they also don't know what to put there, so they'll just put the title there. So now you have a thumbnail that says the title of the sermon, and then a title of the video that says the title of the sermon. It's just redundant. And not only that, a lot of times titles for sermons, they aren't really designed to be something that would grab somebody's attention on YouTube. Again, we don't care about views and likes and just growing channels or numbers, but it is something where, again, if this is the person's first impression of your church, you may not know how something like a out of context sermon title is really gonna come across to them. Now we're gonna get into what actually makes good church thumbnails, and anybody watching this video is gonna be able to implement these tips. But before we go any further, we've talked enough about how important it is to take a look at your church's social media and marketing efforts. But if you really wanna know how you stack up, we actually have a free church marketing review that you can check out, and I'm gonna leave that in the link in the description. It really doesn't take long, and it will really give you an idea of the impact that your church could really be making. So to talk about one of the best practices, let's piggyback off of one of the most common mistakes we just talked about, just putting the sermon title as the thumbnail. Thumbnails really are designed to be something that accompany the title of the video usually. So if you have a sermon that's talking about the armor of God, maybe that's what your pastor calls the actual title of the sermon, your title of the video is going to be the armor of God, but you would want the thumbnail to be something that accompanies that grabs people's attention and makes them want to click on it. This is not clickbait. Remember, this is actually what the sermon's about. This is real. So if the title of the sermon is The Armor of God, in the thumbnail you could put something like Prepping for Life's Toughest Battles. If the title of the sermon is something like Unforgiveness Hinders Your Faith from Growing, the thumbnail could simply be Why You Need to Forgive. When you think of it from an outside perspective, if somebody's scrolling through their YouTube feed and they see a thumbnail that says Why You Need to Forgive, that's probably going to be a lot more relevant to them than somebody who maybe doesn't even know God that well and they see a title that's all about unforgiveness and how it relates specifically to your faith growth. Maybe they think, I don't even have faith to grow right now. That's not even relevant for me. I don't care about church. But they might actually relate to a thumbnail that talks about forgiveness or unforgiveness in their own life. Again, thumbnails, if anything, are an opportunity to minister to people, just straight up. So this is gonna take some brainstorming, but I promise you it's totally worth it to take this intentionality and effort into your thumbnails. Now, the second best practice, I'm gonna be completely honest, is something that churches struggle with because they feel like they don't have the time when really it's just kind of laziness. This best practice is actually getting really good headshots of your pastor speaking. Now, some churches are gonna have this easier than others, where maybe you have nice enough cameras that shoot something like up to 4K, and you have a high enough resolution from the video where you can literally just take a still from the service and zoom it way in on the pastor from maybe like chest up or so, and get a really nice crystal clear image of them speaking. Other churches, like mine, are gonna have to get creative and set aside some time for a clever solution. I've actually covered this in the past on this channel, but what you're gonna do is actually get headshots of your pastor or your speaker. If it's a guest speaker, set aside time for this as well before service, and literally have them go on stage and pretend to speak and take pictures of them then. This actually results in really good looking pictures of your pastor. I find you can control the lighting, you can control the moment, you can take as many as you want. And a common question I get is, but won't people notice if the pastor's not wearing the same outfit? No. To help with this, make sure your speaker is actually wearing neutral colors. It'll be even less noticeable, but honestly, nobody notices, nor does anybody care. I'm sorry. But this really does result in good looking pictures that you can use with your thumbnail. And the final tip is learning how to make these, but then also taking a look at what is working for the bigger, more successful churches out there on YouTube. Again, you're not trying to be like every other church. That's not what I'm saying, but the videos that perform well are usually the ones at the top of the search results when you type in something like a sermon. So you can usually learn from the churches that are at the top of the YouTube search by how they're doing their thumbnails and what seems to be interesting people enough to actually click on them. And I'm glad to say, at least right now in the time of recording, a common style may be that kind of high contrasted look, which takes some time to actually learn how to do in software. However, I'm really happy to report that a common trend right now is actually just taking a genuine moment from the sermon. So these aren't really heavily stylized thumbnails with a bunch of like graphic design know-how. These are really just moments from the sermon and a genuine moment from the service. And I think that's just so great because people that are clicking on it know what they're getting into. They feel like it's not clickbait because, again, it's not. It's just a really good thing to jump on. But you do want to make sure that you're paying attention to these to see if it ever changes, to see what is working for other churches. Now, even though I didn't break it down into its own tips, obviously to make these church thumbnails, it takes some know-how. And if you want to know how to do that, we actually have the perfect video for you on how to use Canva to make thumbnails.